first. It's taking a sec. When I hit yours.
Oh, okay.
Oh yeah, we're in there. Let's see. I'm gonna pull up Facebook. See if it's hitting. Yep. Let's see. I'm gonna pull.
All right. We'll just go ahead and get started.
Yep.
Hello. It's been a long time since
Almost
we've done
a year.
an Ides, and we've timed it just right on the Ides of March. I think it's been almost a year since we've done one of these things.
About 10 months, and we're kind of excited, a little nervous, I guess, again, because we haven't done this in a while. We might seem all over the place because it's another rabbit hole situation with things we looked into. We're also revisiting nostalgia. We did a couple of different episodes going back to 2021 January, and different ways of looking at nostalgia, what the root of it was.
Right.
I guess we talk about overall It's going to be nostalgia, but we did have nostalgia busting the Gipper in there because that's just another one of these. We have memories and feelings about what times were back in the past, and it's not really that accurate.
Right. And that's the whole reason we started the Ides of Apocalypse channel in the first place was
and 6 years ago today was our first broadcast.
Yeah, because the Ides of Apocalypse first of all, Apocalypse is about revealing and revelations. It's not a sinister thing. And the Ides is about the new year and the new harvest. And
we took two inverted terms that the world has inverted these terms. Shakespeare inverted, beware the Ides. And apocalypse is always seen as doom and gloom. These are apocalyptic times. The world's ending, and that's not how apocalypse works. And of course, that's not how Ides works.
Yeah, so it's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. And so we're just presenting some information that we'd like you to try to look at what we're going through and maybe what we've been through in a new light so that we can be hopeful for what's coming, because there's no reason not to be.
Because, God's in control or he isn't. So
right.
He is written. If he says in the Bible, some versions, depending on the version of the Bible you're reading, it's, God says over and over, Jesus says over and over in different forms, fear not, do not fear, never fear. Right. It's a hard lesson to really take hold and actually live it. And I know I've been tested in the past and I've been fearful, and I know I'll be fearful in the future, but we're really not supposed to be fearful. And then we're looking at nostalgia, specifically looking at Ronald Reagan when we get into it. But that's going to get into FISA and all kinds of other stuff. But the overall thing with nostalgia, there's a personal nostalgia and there's what can be called a vicarious nostalgia, where sometimes you may be remembering somebody else's life or some kind of glorified view of what you wish life had been like or what you thought
it was like.
And some of the examples we used previously was, back in the day when the news journalists were really looking for the truth and reporting what really happened, they were always shaping it. We're going to look at that from
like Walter Cronkite, Tom Brokaw, all these guys, back when the news actually reported the news. No,
they were always reporting, telling a narrative, telling a story.
Right.
And, news stories. And then there's his story.
Right. And so nobody's got a bigger, brand reputation, depending on whether you like him or hate him, than Reagan, as far as having this brand that he was just the best president
great conservative icon. When he died and those people lining the streets, I mean, he was an idol, and we've all done it.
Right.
And idols out of men.
And then when you start going back and looking what he actually did, he was the first one that did amnesty for illegals, forever turning California blue. No fault divorce. He codified immunity for big pharma, I think in 1986.
Mm-hmm. He helped get really up the ante on funding abortions.
Yeah. And then most people don't know, we put it in the title of this
Executive Order 12333, which those are two sets of numbers that some people will find interesting. We don't usually get into numerology, but
for some reason these ghouls, these demons, they like it. 33.
It's like they signal each other, or And we like to take note of it, but not as we found them out.
No, it's just kind of fun,
It's
and it's
fun
kind of funny. Ronald Reagan was the 33rd governor of California.
Mhm.
We did a nostalgia video on Harry Truman, the Truman Show. He was the 33rd president. So it was just interesting when we found this Executive Order 12333, which is the basis and foundation for all of the illegal surveillance, the Patriot Act, the FISA court
legislation in 78.
They all are based off of this one executive order that I don't even know how we stumbled on this, but
I think you found the number or something, and then we looked and we had never heard of this. So we see people are doing videos on Executive Order 12333. And it was in his first year in office, about in the December, so almost a year in office. And of course, in 1981, they have to codify and set out some boundaries for the CIA. And we're just like, they really, and it's been amended a few times. George Bush amended it.
In 2007.
And the Obama administration did it 2 days before Trump's inauguration in 2017. And
which Obama, they do keep amending it, but Obama couldn't have done what he has done with the weaponization of the whole of government without this executive
Reagan's
order.
Because this order also allowed the sharing of intelligence, the intelligence that's gathered, and now ever since the what's his name that fled to Russia, and
Edward Snowden,
and just all the other Edward Snowden, there was somebody else in there, was Julian Assange, and so we found out in recent years, last 10 years, that they're just grabbing everything, and then if they decide to look at it later, they have it there. It's all.
And just as a side note, they have different definitions than we do. Like when they talk about collections, what they're not. So they're gathering everything and storing that. And I guess the problem that they have is having a system to go and find the information they need, which AI, I'm sure, will make that easier. But what they consider collections is if they pull that information and they get that, if they happen to use it, then that's the collections. It's not considered collections, what they have sitting.
They consider they haven't
Utah.
violated your rights unless they actually share it with another agency or start using it. And of course, they come up with these guidelines, and they're transparent. They mention their transparency initiatives and stuff like that. But in the transparency initiative, they talk about having to keep methods and sources classified, because national security. It's always national security.
But the reason supposedly they needed this executive order was to create the balance the
balance between the CIA's and the intelligence agencies' statutory duties versus the civil rights.
Between the people's right to privacy and then their, I guess, a right to protect us.
And they talk about the robust congressional oversight and things like that.
Yeah,
we didn't find it again, but Yvonne had found it. We first started looking into this because when Reagan signed it, it was something to do with having the ADL in partnership with the intelligence agencies to ferret out, bad actors and things like that. And then we also had a thought discussing this back and forth, how maybe this is why, we know that when we start seeing technological advances in the public, that our government, what are the think tanks and stuff?
The foundations, and
they've got, like, we're talking about AI specifically, how they've had a working AI model probably for years now that they use to sift through all this stuff they've been collecting for years now. Every text, social media, emails, phone calls.
Right.
And so they've probably used it years ago to find all the white supremacists. Let me see my quotes here.
Right.
Find all these bad actors, these people that want to rebel against the government, and all these people that the FBI talks about. So we started surmising that maybe that's why these things are made up like the Patriot Front, and they had to make it up
because
and
they
get
couldn't
actors
find it.
because they couldn't find what they needed to. Then you make the laws they want, and then have the FBI. When Christopher Wray talks about the parents at the school board meetings are threatening blah blah blah, they're making this stuff up probably because using the tools they've had for years, they couldn't
They
find
can't find
it
it
in the
because
real
you know
world.
that if they did find it, they could have used
They would
that.
have grabbed it. They would have grabbed the people. There would have been, highlighted raids and stuff. So that's another thing with it is we also want to remember to keep all this and do not fear.
Right.
There's nothing, I wouldn't say nothing to fear, but we shouldn't fear.
Right.
And then thinking about the nostalgia thing again, I'm looking back how, we're not in it. We've never had a golden age while we're on this physical world.
Yeah. And, going through COVID and the lockdowns and all that really sent a lot of people spiraling and created a lot of depression. And then, there was a lot of nostalgia going on during COVID. And we in our previous episodes, when we were talking about nostalgia, we talked about how in the mid 1800s that nostalgia was actually a diagnosis for some of the Confederate soldiers.
Yeah, well, for the Union soldiers.
The Union soldiers, not the Confederate soldiers. And so there was 13 supposedly that was like their cause of death.
Yeah. And it started in the 1600s with a Swiss doctor, not quite a doctor. What would you call him? Right before they become a doctor, but he came up with because nostos was remembrance or something, and then the second part of the word they were both from Latin base, and the second part was fear or something like that, or longing or something.
Yeah.
So he coined the term because Swiss mercenaries were being diagnosed with something that they couldn't understand. These guys were coming down with this, and he called it nostalgia because they were away from their homeland, and the only cure was to send them home. It was to get them stop invading and get back to home. And that's what we see with our past and looking back at what these wars have done. These wars always take the men away from the family and either kill them or mess them up in the head and stuff. And so women and children are left vulnerable, and that seems to be the reason for a lot of this.
Yeah. So when we, sent a lot of our soldiers to Afghanistan and Iraq, and I assume there was a lot of soldiers suffering from nostalgia over there, but the idea that we were sending soldiers over there while they're coming across the border, was just maddening. But
yeah, we're fighting them over there, so we don't have to fight them here, but we're letting them all in here.
Yeah, and so that nostalgia that we were going through during COVID and all that, people they just wanted things to go back to the way they were. And you'll see tweets and stuff where they're showing things, from our past, from the 80s, the 70s, the 60s, the 50s, how great things were. But were they great because you didn't know what the hell was going on? I mean, you're remembering a past that it was fake. And so when you say you want it to go back to normal, we don't. We've always said we don't
make
want
up our mind pretty soon.
to go
It's
back.
like I like being more what I think would be aware, even though I'm sure the wool's being pulled over my eyes with something right now. But I like having more of an understanding that we don't. When the next round of heavy stuff comes down, we're not going to be afraid. We're going to be like, what is the lesson to be learned here, or what's the manipulation here? What are they trying to do?
Right. And so that nostalgia back to a time when we had everybody, especially on the right, thinks that President Reagan was such a great president. Well, you think that because that's what you were told. That's what you think he did all these great things, but you were just a more brainwashed person back then. Didn't know that you really couldn't trust, not just your government, anything that had like a position of authority. COVID was not the first time that we had done this whole pandemic thing. The 70s with
1976.
Gerald Ford, the pandemic that never was. We did a video on that too. And, if you Google that, one of the things you'll see is Gerald Ford up there getting a shot on TV.
Yeah, which who knows what the shot was. And apparently something like 60 million or so Americans got this
60
shot.
to 80 million. They actually their goal was to get but when people started dying and getting paralyzed and things, 50 people was enough to pull that off the market.
Yeah.
And
talk about Operation Warp Speed. We mentioned it in a previous show about nostalgia, is that this was even quicker in 1976.
It was less than it was like 6 to 7 months.
Than a year. And they had already got this thing. They got this thing out after they scared everybody at the beginning of the year. Then the summer, they went through the summer and nothing happened worldwide. There was no, they couldn't find it again showing up in people at all.
Right.
So they administered this in the fall of that year with nothing, nobody getting sick worldwide. And they still pushed it out, and they scared everybody into getting it. And then they pulled it. And they had pulled it all within a year. I think it was maybe 10 months total.
Yeah.
Maybe 9 or 10 months.
Oh, it was quick.
It had already been pulled in less time than it took warp speed to happen.
And they had done the same things where they had shamed people into getting it. I knew someone who had remembered it and had, this was a family member, but she had shamed her grandmother into getting it. And while her grandmother was fine, after people started dropping dead, she just lived in total fear that she had kind of got her grandmother to get the shot. So it was like COVID wasn't there's nothing new under the sun. It had happened before. And so when people are thinking during COVID lockdown, I just want to go back to the way, it was never what you think it was, because we were kind of a brainwashed population since the advent of the TV and radio.
And that'll get us into a brief stop at World War II again. But on the other side of the coin of it, it's happened before. Also, we need to be careful of being, that it's never been worse than it is now. This is unprecedented. This is so tough to deal with. We also need to realize these are tough times have always been. And, I have a meme somewhere. I wish I put it on here about all the different end of the world prophecies. That it's a meme that has all these different, and it's hundreds of predictions of this is it. These are end times. We're not supposed to focus on that at all. It says, only the Father knows. Jesus doesn't. That infers to me that Jesus doesn't know the time, the end times, when.
Right.
But or he would, just depending on how you see Trinity and stuff. But he said only the Father knows.
Right.
Only God knows. So looking at, information dissemination and how things are kind of massaged propaganda. And we touched on this before, and it's the United States Office of War Information was created in the summer of 42 by executive order.
Well, so I just want to say, as we're about to tell you what we're telling you now, for all of you, the people that or maybe you've even thought this, where I just want to go back to the things were normal. I mean, think about this. The Office of War Information is now the Department of Defense.
Well, no, we'll get into that where it broke up, because it was that executive order was revoked in 45 by Truman after the war. But the whole narrative that we've been told from World War II, how America got into World War II, is we had a surprise attack at Pearl Harbor. That up until then, the American public was not for going into war. They got burned going into World War I and still remembered that.
Right.
We shouldn't have been in that. And so there was, Roosevelt wanted us in there from, as soon as.
And after Pearl Harbor, this idea that it had galvanized the nation. Well, that's
the story, is that it galvanized the nation into supporting the war and, going after the Japs and the Germans. But what it did is it galvanized Congress.
Right.
And they got on their war horse. But the Office of War Information was formed in 42 in June, which gets close to the Battle of Midway. And it was basically, it was revised.
It was propaganda. It was just.
But it was made because the American people were not
behind they weren't behind it. So they needed like a campaign of propaganda to kind of change that, to the point. Are you going to talk about where Hollywood?
Well, yeah, we're going to get to that too. But he formed the Office of War Information because the American public they did not understand why we were going to be at war, or we were at war for like 6 months, and held great resentment against the Allied nations. So mainly Britain, France, and Russia.
Right.
And then President Roosevelt established this to both meet the demands for news and less confusion, which that means you need to see it the way we see it,
right,
as well as resolve American apathy towards the war. So that dispels the whole Pearl Harbor galvanized the public. But with it, so they formed this board, and then all the major Hollywood studios agreed to run their scripts by the OWI,
right,
War Information. before they would make their movies. All of them except Paramount Studios. And I still
We haven't been able
able
to figure out why.
Paramount resisted, and did that change the way they were after the World War, after war? So basically the Office of War Information gets disbanded in 45, but their duties get split. You get the Voice of America network out of this, but most of their duties are pretty much continue on, but part of them go to the State Department, which runs the VOA.
Right.
And the rest went to the CIA. It was OSS and then CIA 40, I think 47 is when the CIA was created, and national security positions were created. So it still goes on. So just like we used to ask with the CDC when they did the experiments with
Tuskegee
the Tuskegee and stuff, and they try to say, well, no, they didn't infect them in Tuskegee, they just didn't treat them. But
we believe that they.
Well, we found that the same doctor that dealt with them did it in Honduras, and they did infect them in Honduras for sure. So in the Terre Haute prison as well. So we asked the question: do you think the CDC got even more humane and more honest after that?
Right.
And they were only shut down in 72 because they were busted.
Oh, they didn't really shut down. They just renamed.
Yeah, they kept going. So do you think that after the Office of War Information was disbanded and their duties split to the State Department and the CIA, do you actually think that all the information massaging being done with media, and then TV comes out in the 50s, and radio, TV, and movies everything comes out, it's got to be approved. Now, I'm sure things slip through the cracks, but
it was all programming, and
it's been the whole time. So and it's not to be scary, and the world's going to do what the world's going to do, and that's what I wrestle with this myself, is about what is exactly in the world, not of it. What does that mean? And so I still pray about that and try to find stuff in the Bible. I haven't looked at it lately, but just really trying to understand what in the world, not of it means. But I think you get to a better point when you realize, wait a minute, it is the world.
Right.
And there is the world, but God controls everything.
And that you have more control over things than you think you do, which is why the media lives, like, their whole meaning of existence is just to create outrage, fear, division.
Yeah.
And somehow this system feeds off that negative energy. And so if you kind of pull out of the system as much as you can and learn to grow your own food, learn to do things, the way that our ancestors did, because something in the last century changed. And I think that's, the programming of TV and all the different modes of communication and the electrical fields that came along with doing that. So the nostalgia of remembering something that wasn't, and thinking that now is a time, we've never been here before, and like this election, it's going to be, it's the end. No, because
and if God is he's either in control or he's not.
Right. We've been here before, even with the election, like with the Dewey defeats Truman.
Yeah.
Dewey
we did it with our We the Barbarians at the Gates, one of our episodes where, we looked back and it was probably, Rome fell, which it didn't happen all of a sudden. It's the way the U.S. is falling right now. But people out in the country and stuff, they kept going.
Right, right.
But so it's all about how you choose to participate.
And I read that book about the Battle of Athens, Tennessee, and some of the conversation in there, they were talking about the Great Depression and how these people that lived rurally, they didn't know anything about it.
There were people in parts of the country that didn't know in 1861, 1865 that there was a civil war going.
Right, and as far as stolen elections go, those been going on since the beginning of time. And remember Rutherford B. Hayes and
we can't remember Tillman or something.
Yeah, that one kind of reminds me of the 2020 election.
But that election, it was the Republicans doing the chicanery.
Right. So this has happened before. And will probably happen again.
Can't say enough. Nothing new under the sun.
And that's okay.
But getting back to the nostalgia, is using it to you can use it, nostalgia, to connect with good things in the past, and then also to build a better future for you and your family. Because I like how this one lady put it, is that on a psychological level, there is a meaningful difference between missing a past we have lived and missing one we have not. Lived experiences inform us in ways that an imagined past cannot. As we filter the recollections of our past, we have the opportunity to interpret the significance of the experiences that help us discover meaning and purpose in our lives. And I was talking before we went live with Yvonne, we remember good times from our grandparents. Now, every day wasn't a good time at the time.
Right.
But we can look back fondly and know that some of the tough times we had because of disciplinary things or whatever were good, because they were shaping us to be good people when we got older, to be better adults. But there were good times too that we really fondly remember.
And that's a healthy nostalgia, because it's a real. And it
helps you build a better future. And even we did have a negative past before my grandparents saved us from our dad. We did an episode about that. Mm-hmm. But even those really tough times shaped us also. So I used to look back negatively a lot. I used to be jealous of other friends of mine that had these so-called picture perfect childhoods. And I'm sure they had their tough times too that I didn't know about. But
right.
Turning those things into good, letting God work things in your life, because he works all things for good, everything.
Right.
And then going back to the way the world is if we believe what we believe, if God is in control, everything that happens is supposed to happen one way or,
right.
Our free will affects a lot of that too. But this lady in this article kind of put it really good. Feeling nostalgic rather than simply bitter or hateful provides the opportunity to transform adversity into more than survival. Longing for another's childhood can provide a sense of what might have been, and therefore what life could be. If no longer for yourself, then at least for other children. The representation of what one wishes had been can form the vision that inspires one to make that dream a reality for others.
Right. So, if you think about now how we have American intelligence, creating these white supremacist groups because
we can't find them in the real world.
Yeah, because with all the intelligence that they gather, the surveillance, that if there was serious, white supremacist groups out there, they could certainly get them and use them for their purposes. But back in World War II, at the end of World War II, with Operation Paperclip or Overcast, which turned into Paperclip, and we brought all those Nazis here and put one in the head of NASA. And other,
not to mention, nobody ever mentions his brother, who was even worse.
Even worse, yeah. So, how your enemy will accuse you of that which you are guilty. So they call, all the Trump people Nazis and white supremacists and stuff. And so you realize that the Nazis, first of all, we didn't really win World War II. And we're being governed by a bunch of Nazis. But when you realize that the fakeness of it all, and you realize that they don't have as much power as they try to make you think, because they try to get us all on the same plane of fear. Because
it's like going back to looking at media and seeing the screen, even when it showed you the riots and the BLM riots and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But think about your actual experience in your day-to-day life. When I go into work and go into different places, when I travel, and just throughout the city, any different city I'm in, there aren't people looking at each other.
Right.
You don't know everybody's heart, but as far as interacting with people all the time for years,
right.
It doesn't exist out there the way it's presented on the screen. There's some people that everybody has prejudices. Everybody does.
Right.
Nobody's above it, because we're human. In our heart, we prejudge. Everybody does that, but it's not what's on the screen. There aren't these cadres of people in different color skin, marching or doing things like that.
And by putting that in the forefront of your mind, where they put all this negative stuff up there, you will find what you're looking for. So if you're out in the world looking for the good, the true, and the beautiful, it's funny how you'll find more of the good, the true, and beautiful. Mm-hmm. And so if you're looking for more negative stuff, you'll be drawn to that. And
Well,
you,
and
you can
especially
stop that at any time.
especially with modern media too. Anything with the screen or a mountain, anything that requires electronics, you can look back to World War II. Is that the U.S. government started doing their massaging of it, controlling how it happens. So when you see things trend or take off, I just told Avanya that if it's actually a good, true, and beautiful thing happening, they're not going to let it trend.
Right.
So if it is trending, look at the underlying, even if it's something you think you agree with, just kind of look at it again, step back and
ask who took this picture, who took this video.
Yeah.
Start asking some questions.
and then even maybe who scripted it.
Right.
Because I mean, they started scripting it in 1942.
Right.
So we knew it wasn't going to be a real long one, but we wanted to. Other people have started busting Reagan's chops too in the last few years. And
Yeah.
it's just I'm the one of the. And when I was in 14, I wrote a letter to Ronald Reagan. He was the man.
Yeah.
But that's a mistake.
This executive order, if you go and you read it, it's
a very long, but there's what did I?
And if let's say Trump wins the election, if he revoked that executive order,
that would be something else.
He would have the power to do. Basically, you've just yanked the foundation from the Patriot Act, the NDAA, FISA, just all the surveillance. And
then we'd also talked about, we think that the whole fight that keeps coming up about FISA, they're going to renew it or not.
Right.
They need, what is it, the 702 or the 702?
The 702, which allows all the queries.
And they need this so bad, but is that distracting you from, there's this executive order that people talked about 10 years ago. We found out, we never heard of it.
Right.
But 10 years ago, there were even major news publications reporting on it. So it's out there. And it's there's executive orders all over that go back, the one with FDR in 1933, the Emergency Act that allowed him to do so many things that he did.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's a whole other thing.
Why don't past presidents revoke that thing?
Why doesn't Trump go into office and revoke the the emergency? We've been under it since
33.
Yeah, 1933.
It allowed him to seize banks and all that, and So why doesn't that get? That's not a hidden thing.
No.
And they're not really hidden. It's just
most that it's not talked about.
There's so much noise about other things that you don't see it.
Right. And, with the end of World War II and the bringing in the Nazis did we ever do the stream on the Red House Report? I think we were going to, and then
I think we did something else.
We didn't do it, but the Red House Report came out in November 44, which it was an intelligence report, and it was all about how preparing the world for a post-war recovery after Germany supposedly lost, and it was going to prepare for the return of the Nazis. So instead of this, the Third Reich, we would have the Fourth Reich, which we have now, which would be an economic empire run by Nazis, which is what we have. That goes back to the nostalgia of remembering, a time that never was, or a more patriotic America, or America when you didn't know. All of this was the groundwork for all of what we're going through right now was being laid. But they need our compliance, and they need all of us on the same page for their plans.
For war and do all that.
For their plan. And I don't think they have that. I think that's why they're struggling with Ukraine, and now I think they're trying to get war with Iran, and
they're
who knows?
Trying to juggle those and try to turn focus.
It's
on
harder
China.
for them to do that now.
And me and Yvonne talked about that too. Is that there are always these bad actors, and they do have plans. Agenda 2030.
2050.
They have these plans that they want to enact, but
it's an offer.
Can't.
It's an offer, though,
and it's getting harder and harder for them to get the offers accepted. I think, and that's what
That's why they're trying to censor the flow of information and try to get everybody back on the same page again. But it's kind of like Pandora's box, or putting the cat back in the bag. It can't be done, because so many of us, if you did. Let's say that you got the censoring down to where you needed it to be. I'm not going to all of a sudden just start believing CNN or whatever it is
Yeah.
y'all are spouting. So I think it's a brave new world in a good way.
Oh yeah, and it's the folks that do want to enact these plans. They aren't as competent as they used to be.
Yeah.
These folks that set up this stuff after World War II were thinkers and they were more competent. I
They
think
were
that's why.
smarter.
I think that's why geopolitics is out of hand right now, because there are more mature people in the rest of the world outside of the Western world.
Yeah, you can see
They're
that
more
on
mature
display.
people that they've gone through some tough times
Yeah.
that we're going to have to go through now, because you get decadent. You start out small and
Right.
you're strong, you're hustling, and then you get a little more successful the way the U.S. did, and then you get overconfident, you get full of yourself, and then you start to decay. And there's other people out there like Russia, China, and Iran that they're competent people that see through some of these facades. And so right now, I do believe that no matter who you're looking at, who's going to be president, who's leading, so-called elites, they're not really elite.
Right.
They're not as competent as they used to be decades ago. And that's why they're also flailing now.
And they don't know as much as people think that they know. And I think that if you take somebody that's out in the country that can grow their own food and live off the land, that person's a whole lot smarter than those who are close to power.
He's also a lot more at peace and calm.
Yeah. And so as we go through this transition of whatever's happening in this country, it's kind of like when we were talking about, are we the barbarians at the gates? That it's probably not going to be some apocalyptic where everything just shuts down and everybody's just living in despair. There's going to be two worlds where those who are really plugged into the system and dependent on the system are going to go through a really bad time, and where we're probably going to go through some struggles
it's
too.
It's going to be tougher, but we're going to be happier doing it.
And we're going to make it because we're God. I mean, because of God. Whatever God you might worship or who you think God is, we came here for a reason, and we have more power than they would want you to think, which is why they distract you with everything.
To look at it as, why does the world spend so much effort to turn you away from what you're supposed to be,
and also to make you think you're just a nobody, a speck, that you're not
hurtling through space and everything was just from an explosion.
Yeah,
the world is designed to separate us from who we really are. That's part of the in the world, not of it. We are here in this physical form right now, but we're not bonded to it or anything. We need to, well, some of us are, and I know I was, I'm trying to find a way to separate and just not be like the world. So,
right.
And then I'll just put up what we usually like to close with is this Bible verse. And this is the crux of it. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. And that's where it's always been.
Right.
And I think the sooner it doesn't even take a majority, because of what it said, the Bible is one man with God is the majority. One person with God is the majority. So, I think just like the American Revolution, if you get 2 or 3% of the people really thinking about this way and seeing it this way, it could change a lot. Because just like
move things.
Sodom and Gomorrah, if there was one righteous man there, those cities would still be here.
Well, just like with COVID, with the lockdowns and the mask, it was the few people that didn't go along with it that we were able to come out of that probably sooner than they had wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
So you have more power than you think, and the nostalgia of thinking you want to return to the things the way things were.
And that's enough. It kind of goes in line with, if you are comfortable in this world, then something's wrong, maybe.
Yeah.
Especially if you're really comfortable and like, everything's right. It used to be like in sales. If you think you got it figured out, you're going to stop being a good salesman.
Right. Right.
Don't be too
don't
comfy.
despair, and don't, even with the election, don't get caught up in the politics of division or thinking that this is the end if one or the other ends. Like, how many times do you have to be told that this is it's not, we're not
Yeah.
going to live.
It's going to amp up this year. It's going to be interesting.
So so don't give
Yes.
the system that energy
If
that
you get
it's
a
seeking to feed off of.
breaking story comes out tomorrow and it starts, everything amps up. Just step back
Yeah,
and go,
I would.
okay, this is allowed to proliferate. Why is it being allowed to proliferate?
Right. Because, they can stop whatever they want and
Anytime they want, instantly.
So if you're seeing something they're putting in front of your face,
Twitter.
start asking yourself why, who does this benefit? And then also remember that in 2 days, the whole story might be, oh, oops, we were wrong.
Or nothing happened. It just disappears.
Yeah.
It just stops being said.
Yeah. So as it amps up, I would just challenge you to, keep your faith, stay plugged into the positive energy of this beautiful world has to offer.
And if you happen to be in a city where a bunch of dudes in khaki pants and masks are walking around with these flags,
somebody go pull the mask down.
Actually, I was going to say, if you happen to see them walking down the street in those columns,
yeah,
of 3 or 2 guys, 2 abreast, I would say ignore it.
Yeah.
And encourage anybody else in your immediate vicinity to ignore it.
Yeah.
Because most people, I think, are ignoring it.
Right.
And just ignore it and let them film their little LARP that
their
they're
little
doing.
Screenplay.
I guess we can
good.
sign off with that. So
Yeah.
we're going to try to get back on track with this.
And start doing these monthly.
And 6 years of doing it with about a 10-month break this last year. So,
yeah. So
we appreciate anybody seeing this and watching it. And
appreciate if you
tell
share
us what
it
you think and share it, or
have some feedback. Put it in the replies on Twitter or in
don't
the
be
comments
mean.
on
We can take it,
YouTube.
but there's no reason to be mean if you
Yeah.
want. So give us some feedback.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
And we'll see you next time.